welcome to Care Chat Live. So today obviously was a reschedule. I apologize for that. Unfortunately, the big internet companies did not agree with our time slot and decided they were going to shift things around for us.
They cut me off.
They cut Chris off, and quite honestly, I'm talking to Chris MacLellan, who's with us, who's going to be hosting this one. We said it just doesn't make a whole heck of a lot of sense to do it without Chris in this case. So we rescheduled, and as caregivers, I think we can all appreciate the idea of being flexible and being able to move and think on our feet. So thank you guys for being patient, and thanks to those who are tuning in today. We do really appreciate the live audience when we can get one. But as I said, sort of in the pre work before the live started, the goal here is really for us to create sort of a nice body of content that we can then use on caregiving.com to bring exposure, to bring awareness to these topics, to share the research that folks like Joel and the folks at Zander and the work that Zander and his team is doing, to really promote their efforts and promote the efforts of caregivers and LGBTQ caregivers in this case, across the country and around the world. So we really appreciate everybody doing this. A couple of logistical items. We're gonna go through a couple presentations. Zander, who's not with us, who's our other host, has a pre-recorded video that we're gonna share that he made specifically for this Care Chat. So we'll watch that, and then Joel's gonna walk through, or before that, Joel's gonna walk through a presentation that he's put together. If at any point you guys have questions, or anyone's got questions, myself and Chris included, feel free to either enter those into the chat or raise your hand, and share those with the group, and I can then share those with either of our two hosts here to expand upon. And we'll keep it very casual, no order of operations or anything like that needed. We'll roll with it as we typically do. So again, welcome. Thank you guys for joining us in today's Care Chat. I'm going to let Chris MacLellan, our host, introduce himself here in a second. But for now, I'll just introduce Joel and Zander. Joel is the associate professor at the university, or is a associate professor. The or a? I'm assuming you're one of several.
One of several. Yeah.
Okay. You are a associate professor at the University of Tennessee, and has been involved in a study about the experiences of LGBTQ plus caregivers of people with dementia. And then I mentioned Zander, who's joining us via a pre-recorded video, is a wellness and leadership facilitator, and is also the co-founder of the LGBTQ Caregiver Center. He's also a Latino transgender man caring for his 80-year-old father. And we'll get to hear Zander's story here shortly. So welcome, everybody. I'm looking forward to this. You guys let me know. I'll be playing sort of the Vanna White role of this Care Chat, and just serving up the slides and the videos as needed. But yeah, I'm excited to have both of you here live, and I'll hand it over to Chris so he can take it from here. Oh, I should introduce myself though, shouldn't I?
Well, yeah, I was going to just say that. Who is this guy?
Random talking head with a backwards hat on. I am Mike Hidsani. I am the CEO of caregiving.com and the co-founder of a technology platform for caregivers called Carely. So thanks for having me, and thanks for joining us. Over to you, Chris.
Well, and thanks for having me. And some of you might know, I'm Christopher MacLellan, the CEO and founder at the Whole Care Network, where we do podcast and collaborate with caregiving.com. And you might know me as the bow tie guy. And it's great to be back on with caregiving.com. I got my start on caregiving.com almost 10, 11 years ago when I was a caregiver for my partner, Richard. And we'll get into that, a little bit of that story later on in the program. But Mike, again, thank you. And Joel, it's a delight to meet you and learn about the terrific research and work that you're doing, because there really isn't, when you think about it, there really isn't a lot of research that's been done on LGBT caregivers. And I think you're kind of on the cutting edge of some information. So welcome. So tell us a little bit about you and the work that you're doing, and we'll get into your presentation.
Sure. So as Mike mentioned, I'm an associate professor here in the College of Nursing at the University of Tennessee. And my research program is focused on caregivers of people with dementia. And specifically, I have a personal interest in LGBTQ caregivers and how I can support us and our community in the work that I do. And so my colleagues and I that I'll be talking about in my presentation recently conducted some work that was funded by the National Institute on Aging to really describe the experiences of LGBTQ caregivers of people with dementia for the first time. So I'll provide some overall caregiving stats for LGBTQ caregivers overall, but my colleagues and I have really focused on dementia caregiving. And so I'm happy to talk about, some of the things that we found and some of the ideas that we have going forward.
Very good. The platform is all yours.
Okay, perfect. Well, I will share these slides and get those up. So hopefully everyone is seeing the slides. So I was asked to provide just some quick facts about LGBTQ caregivers and what we know and what we don't know. One of the things that we know is that compared with heterosexual peers, LGBTQ plus adults provide caregiving at a higher rate. It's 1 in 5 for LGBTQ adults versus 1 in 6 in the general population. So we're taking on these caregiving roles more frequently. We also know from research that just in general, LGBTQ folks across the lifespan, from adolescence into adulthood and older adulthood, experience poorer physical and mental health. There are health disparities that exist across the lifespan that are sometimes more pronounced in different groups of that LGBTQ acronym and at different times across the lifespan. And we're beginning to understand that the combination of those two things, being an LGBTQ adult and being an LGBTQ caregiver, have this intersectionality that can increase those health disparities even more. So we know that LGBTQ caregivers are 2 to 5 times more likely to report poor physical health and mental health compared with their heterosexual caregiving peers. We also know that the demographics of these LGBTQ caregivers are significantly different than their heterosexual caregivers who are providing similar care. They're significantly younger. They're more racially and ethnically diverse, and they're more likely to be helping with medical and nursing tasks. So things like managing medications, dealing with incontinence, wound care, blood sugar evaluation, blood pressure, those kinds of things. And they also experience higher levels of physical, emotional, and financial strain. And we did an analysis of data from Caregiving in the USA, the survey that the National Alliance for Caregiving and AARP put out every year. And in 2015, they added a question about whether or not someone identified as a member of the LGBTQ community for the first time. So we took those data and analyzed those, and that's where this first bullet point comes from. And we found that if the LGBTQ caregiver was the child of the person they were caring for, they had 2 to 3 times more emotional strain than their heterosexual caregivers who were also the child. So a lot of relationship dynamics are happening with these caregiving situations that we're beginning to start to tease apart. We also know that just in general, caregivers are younger. Everybody, I think, has an idea in their head when I talk about caregiving of it is, the wife of the older wife of the man. And that's not the case. 25% of caregivers for people with dementia are millennials, that is under the age of 38. So it wasn't surprising to us that we found that these caregivers are younger, more racially and ethnically diverse, because younger generations in this country are more racially and ethnically diverse and more diverse in terms of their sexual orientation and gender identity. It may be that the higher levels of strain that we see that are related to this LGBTQ caregiver identity is because that support services are not specifically designed for us. And so we also know from research that LGBTQ caregivers are less frequently seeking out these support services, sometimes out of fear of disclosing their sexual or gender minority identity or that of the person they're caring for. And because the dynamics of society and the environment in which we all live continue to change over time, different generations of the LGBTQ community have grown up under different levels of discrimination, denial of services, receipt of poor care, et cetera. And so this overlapping years of stigma and our history in this country and abroad has an impact on our care partnerships and how we go out seeking care. Another thing that's important to realize, particularly when you think about those generational differences, is that many LGBTQ older adults may not have a relationship with biological families and rely more on families of choice. We found that about 10% of the caregivers in that one caregiving study and in the follow-up caregiver studies that we've done identify as the friend or a neighbor or a caregiving non-relative of the person they're caring for. And so LGBTQ caregivers are relying on families of choice, which we have done for decades because of these different environmental contexts that I spoke about earlier. So chosen family, friends, and community often serve as caregivers for LGBTQ older adults, regardless of condition. And that's certainly the case with the dementia research that we've been finding. And one of the things that may also prohibit or sort of present a barrier for these caregivers to seek the services that exist is that they're not designed for this caregiver identity. They're often designed for the spouse or the partner, or they're designed for the child. And in those cases, they're usually designed for the heterosexual spouse, partner, or the child. They're not considering friends, other relatives, or different relationships. And so that's one of the things that we want to hope to change in the future.
Can I jump in real quick and ask you a question on that part?
Sure.
Joel, you mind? Not designed. Can you elaborate a little bit more about programs not being designed?
So one of the things that I've found when I've looked at caregiving resources that exist and that might be shared with different agencies that I work with is I don't see myself, and other LGBTQ folks may not see themselves in the images that are used. You may see, again, an image that looks like the wife who's providing care for her husband. So there's sort of a heteronormativity to what is presented and how it's presented and the ways in which the information is provided. Oh, well, you as the spouse might need this. Well, I as the long distance grandchild who's providing care to my grandfather, I need completely different resources than the spouse or the partner who's living with the person they're providing care for. So there's a disconnect not only in how the information is presented, but the type of information that is presented.
And then when you see supporting images from providers, that kind of cues the caregiver, the LGBT caregiver, that they're in a friendly place.
Exactly. And at the very least, it lets you know they're thinking about it. They may not have all the answers. They may not have something specific for an LGBTQ caregiver, but they're thinking about it and they've got it on their radar.
And you kind of know that they're welcoming. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. So for the local Office on Aging here, where I'm located in Knox County, Tennessee, I'm on the executive board. And before I even joined the board, they redesigned the cover of the services catalog that they provide to include more inclusive images, not just of sexual orientation and gender identity, but also race and ethnicity as well. So I was really proud when they showed us the new cover. I'm like, this is who we are, and this is who we should be letting everybody know the services that exist.
Very good. Thank you.
You're welcome. But one of the things, as Chris mentioned, is that despite these acknowledged disparities, there's still gaps in the understanding of the unique needs of LGBTQ caregivers. One of the reasons for that is because a lot of the large public health and aging surveys do not include, or did not include until recently, questions related to sexual orientation or gender identity. So it wasn't possible to analyze the data from these large national data sets and understand what might be happening for LGBTQ caregivers. As I mentioned, 2015 was the first time they added that question to the Caregiving in the USA survey. And the National Alliance for Caregiving and AARP have been doing that survey every year for many years now. And so this was the first time, just 6 years ago, that they added that question that allowed us to do this first analysis. Similarly, the CDC, they do lots of national surveys every year, like the National Health Interview Survey. They didn't add a question about sexual orientation to that survey until 2013. And they still haven't added questions about gender identity, so it's not possible to parse out what might be happening with transgender caregivers and individuals. So we're still working on and advocating for all of these large national data sets that we use to, quite frankly, change policy and legislation to include us so that we can have better informed decisions. And then again, all of this leads to a shortage of services that reflect knowledge and understanding of who these LGBT caregivers are, whether it's just the way in which you promote it or the information that you're sharing as well. The good news, so all of that sort of down stuff, the good news is that more and more research is being done in this area among LGBTQ allied researchers. So for example, I attend the Gerontological Society of America research conference every year. And let's see, I think it was don't quote me on this exactly, I think it was 2018 that it was in Boston, whenever it was in Boston, recently when it was in Boston. For many years, it seemed like there was one LGBTQ session, and that was the one that was sponsored by the research interest group. That particular year, there was one or two every day, and it wasn't just those that were sponsored by the research group. And I found myself presenting my LGBTQ specific research in a session that was just about caregivers, and everybody was talking about all different types of caregiver populations and identities. So it's exciting to see that more and more research is being done, and that organizations and groups like caregiving.com are increasing outreach and support to LGBTQ caregivers so that we can better understand what the needs are. We know what the disparities are, but we don't know how they all sort of work together and interplay and what the experiences might be. And so it's exciting to see that this space really is opening up, and I'm really pleased to be part of this today.
So as a question just came in from our friend Link, is there any work being done on sort of the data side to provide more of like the actual data behind how many of these folks are out there, just to sort of highlight how big of a problem or a need this actually is?
Yes. So different national surveys do it differently. The Behavioral Risk Factor Surveillance System, BRFSS, has been asking these questions a lot longer than some of the others, like the National Interview Survey that I mentioned. But different states can opt out of some of those questions in BRFSS, so we don't always have it for every state in the union. But I believe one of the Congress people from Colorado and someone else just introduced legislation this week in Congress to add sexual orientation and gender identity questions to all national surveys. So it's on the radar of policymakers. And the good thing about these national surveys is that every couple of years, whenever they do redesign things and they want to add new questions, they have an open call for public input. So anybody can write in and advocate for adding these questions. It doesn't just have to be researchers. Anybody can write in and provide public input about the types of questions that need to be asked.
That's super interesting, and we'll have to follow up. I think that's something we can probably help do from caregiving.com's perspective, as well as to elevate those questions and get the attention of folks who need to see them.
Right.
So we're absolutely all in on helping support that effort. So
that National Health Interview Survey, it's one of the ones that the Department of Health and Human Services uses to drive policy and to change things. Like every year, they do it every year and have a baseline number of questions that they ask, but then every year they also ask specific questions around a particular topic, from cancer to cardiovascular disease, et cetera. And then a lot of that information is used to change practice, like when cancer screenings happen, when different health screenings happen. So it really is a snapshot of the health of the country. That survey also doesn't have a caregiving question. It doesn't ask people whether or not they are a caregiver. And that would be a tremendous addition to that, beyond sexual orientation, gender identity, to be able to say, okay, in this survey, we also know who the caregivers are, particularly when it's one of the ones that's driving policy.
That's very important information to know. And it's also important, and this is, for Mike, that having allies involved in these conversations really add a strong voice, because it can't just be us and the LGBT community driving the conversation. We have to have allies that are participating as well.
Absolutely. One of the things we're doing, though, while we wait for national surveys to catch up, is the research that I mentioned. And so it was funded by the National Institute on Aging. And so the opinions that I express related to that research are mine and my collaborators, and do not represent those of the National Institute on Aging. Got to get that disclosure in there.
Gotta have those disclaimers.
Absolutely. But we were interested in, again, caregivers of people with dementia. When we looked at the caregiving in the USA data, we thought, okay, this is it. This is the data set we wanted, because we were interested in this specific caregiving population.
Right.
And out of all the LGBTQ caregivers in that previous data set, 9 said they were caring for someone with dementia. And we knew that wasn't the full picture. There are more than that.
Nowhere near that.
Right. So that came out to about 11% of caregivers, and again, of the LGBTQ caregivers. And again, we knew that wasn't reflective of the caregiving population, because about half of caregivers in the country are providing care for someone with dementia. So we got this study funded from NIA, and I was the lead on that study, and had colleagues here from the University of Tennessee, Dr. Jennifer Jabson-Tree in public health, and then colleagues at UNLV, Dr. Jason Flatt, Johns Hopkins, Dr. Alden Gross, and Ohio State, Dr. Karen Rose. And it really was designed to describe caregivers for the first time of people with dementia who were also LGBTQ. So we used social media as a way to recruit these people. And we had an online survey, and we recruited 286. That was our goal, and we met it. We recruited 286 LGBTQ caregivers of people with dementia across all identities. The majority were gay men, but we had lesbian, bisexual, queer, and trans caregivers. In fact, if I'm remembering correctly, about 15% of the caregivers in our sample identified as transgender. So we were really pleased about that. And 36% of the people in our sample said that they were Latino American. So we were really pleased about that as well, because we had a very diverse sample compared with some previous research. Again, we found that they were significantly younger. They ranged in age from 21 to 72. The majority of them were millennials under the age of 38. 91% of them were working full or part-time, which is very different than the heterosexual caregiving dynamics, where a lot of people in this situation are retired. What else can I tell you about this particular study? A third of them lived in a rural area. Most of them were caregiving from a distance, so they didn't live with the person they were caring for. More than half of them were not using caregiving services that exist. We asked them those types of questions. Are you using respite care? Are you using other types of caregiving services? The majority said they were not. Those who did use caregiver services were again seeking out that financial information. So there was probably some level of financial strain that was being experienced there.
How to pay for it. And of course, what's consistent across the board is once you get involved as a caregiver, you're not really sure how to access information. Because
Absolutely.
it's usually it's a new event that they're dealing with in their life, and then they're dealing with social service agencies, medical providers, things that most likely they haven't done in the past.
Absolutely. We also asked about levels of stress. 3/4 of the caregivers in our sample reported moderate to high levels of stress. A third of them were managing a chronic condition of their own. And we know from the general caregiver statistics for people who are caring for someone with dementia that about 30 to 40% of dementia caregivers report some level of depressed mood. Don't want to say that's necessarily depression, but they report some level of depressed mood. In our sample, the proportion that reported depressed mood on a scale that sort of has a clinical cutoff for probable depression, 78% of the sample scored above that clinical cutoff. So nearly 8 out of 10 were living with some level of depressed mood or depression. Now, we also know that LGBTQ folks are more likely to have a history of depression or at risk for depression or living with depression, but that's not 78%.
Right.
And so we think that this overlap of being a queer person in the US and being a caregiver can increase the risk of depression. And so that's one of the things that we want to explore more fully. That was one of those, okay, we thought this was going to be high. We didn't think it was going to be that high.
So important to have this critical information so that we can foster change.
Exactly. Absolutely. And
and I'll just say too, to add to that, it helps us folk caregiving.com start to think about how do we prioritize the content and the support and the tools, and curate services based on the largest need. So it all starts with the data. And that's why, I asked about the data, is because I think not only are we engaged in this caregiving.com, but I think the data will help others outside of this industry, whether it's technology providers, government agencies, associations, also start to get involved when they can really see the meat of the challenge that exists.
Absolutely. And speaking of technology, I didn't mention that the reason that we use social media and online data recruitment and collection for this study is because that we know from some of our own research, but that of others, that LGBTQ folks use the internet more frequently than their heterosexual peers. And they use it more for health-seeking information. They're on the internet more. We're on the internet more looking for health-related content. And so we knew that these caregivers were in this space. And from some of the other work that I've done on how caregivers use social media overall, we knew that they were in this space and this was a place where we could get them. We were really excited by the diversity of our sample. We hope that in the future we can make it even more diverse. But I think it sort of goes along with what you were saying, Mike, of a space that exists for interacting with and supporting these caregivers because they're already there.
Awesome.
I just want to share this one flyer. So I'm part of a study that's being led right now by Dr. Whitney Wharton at Emory University, where we're looking at one of those really good evidence-based successful interventions, Savvy Caregiver, that's been around for many years, has great outcomes, lots of places use it, but how we can adapt that to LGBTQ caregivers, and also understanding, some of the things that we found in our research that I just shared, about depression or family dynamics. We can only ask so many questions before it becomes too burdensome. And we asked 110 questions, and there were probably 110 more that we could have asked.
Sure.
And so we have so many questions now that we want to ask and be able to talk to caregivers about, okay, this is what we found. Does this make sense to you? Or this is what we think is going on right here. What do you think about that? So we're really in this continuing to do this descriptive work while also going forward with some of the things we've identified, like stress, depression, et cetera, and trying to move interventions forward. But I just wanted to give a shout out to this study because it is ongoing. And if you're interested, please reach out to Whitney or find me on Twitter or wherever, and I can get you the information for that.
Right. And we'll have all this contact information available on caregiving.com that people can access. And, goodness, Joel, it's so important to have the stats.
Yes.
But what helps the stats is having stories that connect the stats, because people connect with stories, obviously.
Absolutely.
And so now we're going to have Zander's story here, the LGBTQ caregiver, and I get to queue up Mike to.
That's right. Mike, the technology guy.
Cue Mike, the tech guy.
To figure it out. I was just wondering, all of a sudden Joel's screen share went away, and I'm assuming, Joel, that you clicked a button, and I didn't do that. Okay.
Yes, I did that. You didn't.
Yeah, because in order,
I was scrambling. I was going, oh no, what have I done?
Yeah. No.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Great. I am the host now. I am the captain now. Okay. Let's share the video from Zander. Everybody just sit back, kick your feet up. This is a really cool thing, and we're really grateful for him for putting this together for us and to share a little bit about his story. And let me share my screen. Let's do that. Share. All right, let me press play. And Chris, do me a favor. If the audio doesn't come through, just let me know. Just shout.
No audio.
You said no audio?
No audio.
Okay, hold on. One more try here. I think
there's an audio button to the left.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. I forget. We went through this already, didn't we, Chris?
Yeah. Huh.
No, where did I find that last time we had it?
I have intruders.
Okay, hold on. Let me reset here. Back to my Zoom meeting. Here we go. We'll figure this out. There we go. Share sound. I just forgot to click the button. All right. Well, let me know if it comes through on this one. You can even just give me a thumbs up if you want.
Hello, Care Chat. My name is Zander Keig, and I'm going to be sharing with you about my caregiving journey and also about the advocacy work that I do for LGBTQ plus caregivers. So again, my name is Zander Keig. I'm a licensed clinical social worker in the city of Orlando, state of Florida. I'm a trans man. I've been part community since 1984. That's when I first came out as lesbian and was active in the community in Los Angeles, California, where I was raised, and have been active ever since. I'll be turning 55 in just a couple of weeks. So many, many years of being an advocate and in some ways activist in the community. I'm also a military veteran. And so is my father. And my father is the person that I provide care for. My father is 80 years old. He has dementia. He's currently in assisted living, but he did live with my wife and I for a year and a half in our home in Florida. And when COVID hit, we were pressed to put him into medical respite. That was supposed to be for 2 weeks and then another 2 weeks. And then ultimately it was 6 weeks and then 8 weeks. And he's still there. He's actually moved into the assisted living section of the home where he was in medical respite. I was not ready. I wasn't prepared to be a caregiver. I'm an only child. My mother died 21 years ago. And so idea that he had dementia. We had been seeing him weekly for brunch for several years. And although there were some noticeable issues with him, I wasn't familiar with dementia. Nobody in my family has had dementia. And so what ended up happening is he moved in with us, and within a couple of days, I knew something was off with him. My father was a computer scientist and spent his whole career, almost 40 years, working in computers. And we had to get on a computer really quickly and print out some documents to take down to the Department of Motor Vehicles to get new identification cards for the state of Florida. We had just moved from California to Florida. And my father, I was already finished and waiting for my father. I thought maybe he was just sort of dilly-dallying, reading emails or something. It turned out he couldn't figure out how to navigate the mouse and double-click on the icon on the desktop to open up the Chrome platform to even get into his Gmail. So I helped him with that. But over the course of about 2 weeks, I noticed that more and more of his capacity was limited. So what I did is I took him to the Department of Veterans Affairs because, like myself, my father served in the military. He was in the Marine Corps. And I had him assessed and evaluated, and he was diagnosed with dementia. And I was able to start getting him enrolled in some programs through the Department of Veterans Affairs that are available, like adult daycare, medical respite, home health assistance. A lot of really great resources are available. Other ways that, my life has changed around caregiving is I'm now the power of attorney for my father. I make all medical decisions and financial decisions. I'm his legal representative. So I had to sign him up to get him on Medicaid. He already had Medicare. He has Social Security income, but no pension, no retirement funds. So I had to figure out how to find a place for him that would take him with Medicare and his Social Security, or Medicaid and his Social Security. So it was a lot of time and effort that I had to put in to getting him on Medicaid in the state of Florida. It was not easy. It took months and months and months, but thankfully he was approved. A lot of things that I've been able to do for myself for some self-care is, and I have a lot of reminders about this. What I do full time basically now is I'm a wellness facilitator and a mindfulness facilitator. So I guide people through mindfulness and wellness practices, like how to get a good night's sleep and how to navigate uncertainty and how to handle distressing emotions, how to communicate more effectively, how to be more compassionate about yourself. So I get a constant reminder to do these things for myself, which is really rewarding. So that's the primary bulk of my self-care. In addition to that, I'm married to a wonderful woman who's a licensed marriage and family therapist, and we enjoy a lot of time together out and about, in the city of Orlando, going to Universal, soon starting to go back to Disney World, and just spending time with her and also her family. Her mother and father and her sister live out here. So just spending a lot of time with family. That's why we moved to Florida, to be by family. And so thankfully, we have been able to be very much engaged with family, not only through the COVID epidemic, but since then as well. I'm also co-founding an LGBT Caregiver Center. And so I was approached by a former VA social worker like myself. I worked for the Department of Veterans Affairs as a social worker. So somebody who had worked with the Department of Veterans Affairs as a social worker for many, many more years than I did, left the VA. And after they had spent several years building the caregiver program at the Department of Veterans Affairs. So they approached me as an ally to the LGBT community. They approached me as a member of the community to co-found an LGBT Caregiver Center, a virtual center, not a physical location, at least not any time in the near future. And so we're in the process of establishing that center, building up the advisory board, and also connecting in with academics who are doing research specifically around LGBT caregiving, LGBT dementia, and that combination too, right, of providing care for people who are LGBT with dementia, and then also being an LGBT person who's providing care to somebody who may or may not be LGBT, but who has dementia. So the LGBT Caregiver Center will incorporate a number of things. One, it'll be a support for people who are caregivers. And one of the things we'll be able to do is, so the Caregiver Wellness Collective is founding or establishing the LGBT Caregiver Center. And that Caregiver Wellness Collective has another program called Yoga for Caregivers, where yoga instructors are donating time to lead yoga classes for caregivers. So we'll be able to share the Yoga for Caregivers resources with the LGBT Caregiver Center members. We'll also be able to connect them in with all this research that's available from these academics that are doing the research, plus AARP and SAGE are two organizations for seniors, for older people in the United States. And both of them have a lot of really good information that's specific and pertinent to LGBT people, either as caregivers or the people, the care receivers. And then also Caregiving or caregiver.net. I apologize that I don't remember exactly what it is. They're also doing a lot of work to get LGBT caregiving information out and readily available and to be able to provide services. So I think we're all going to be collaborating with each other in order to better serve this community of LGBT people who are taking care of others or needing care from others. The last thing I'd like to add is just that as a trans person, specifically as a trans man, I think about my own experience in the future of accessing elder care and assisted living or medical respite or adult daycare. I mean, I don't know my future. And so I wonder about things. I don't really worry, but I wonder about things like, am I going to remember that I'm a trans man? Will I be provided access to the trans healthcare that I need, like my hormone injections? Or maybe at that point, I'll just be doing gel or creams or something. But I wonder about that. My wife is younger than I am, so my hope is that I'd be able to stay in the home for as long as possible. And I do have long-term disability insurance. I highly recommend getting that to pay for the cost, to offset the cost. It's very, very expensive to stay in an assisted living facility or nursing home that provides exemplary care, not some warehousing kind of facility. You wouldn't want to put anybody in those places. And so I definitely don't want to be there. And so I'm investing in my future by paying ahead for that. I don't recommend doing it until you're older, maybe, 45, 50 years old, and then starting to pay for that, because it's going to be a benefit that you'll need. It'll supplement maybe your retirement or your Social Security or pension, whatever your money you're going to have when you get older. I'd just like to say thank you for the opportunity to the Care Chat team and also to all of you who are caregivers, care providers. Thank you so much for that work that you're doing. And please give us a look up on the internet. So the LGBT Caregiver Center, there's a Facebook page and a LinkedIn page. So please go become a member and then share it with your networks and let people know. So, because we're just starting to build now. So any assistance we can get with promoting what we're doing out would be really helpful. Thank you so much, and happy Pride.
Well, that was off the charts.
No, that's good, right? So again, I think the reason we share that, and you're probably asking yourself as we are sharing it, why it's important. And Chris, I know you echo this all the time. I think it's critical that we hear stories of caregivers, right? We hear stories because you probably heard, even me as a straight male, I'm hearing a lot of those things as a caregiver, and I'm relating to many of them. Caring for my father, VA, early dementia, sort of early recognition of those symptoms. A lot of those challenges probably relate across the board, but then there's also a lot of unique aspects to his story. And I think, like most caregivers, we share sort of many things. And then we also have a lot of unique aspects to our situation. And the biggest challenge, I think, for us as an organization trying to support everyone and every caregiver, right, we have to be made aware of this stuff so that we can start to address these challenges and create solutions and really raise the bar in terms of support and how we help.
Exactly. And I'm just a strong believer that there's no other social issue like caregiving that is as indiscriminate and brings people from diverse backgrounds that understand what you're going through. Doesn't make any difference if you're gay or straight, black or white, Asian, Filipino. When a caregiver shares their story, then people understand because they've been in that trenches. And then they share those resources, they share those validations, they share the information that we need. Because one of the things, and there's so many wonderful things that Zander said, but one that stuck out, I wasn't prepared. There's not one caregiver I've met in the 10 years I've been advocating for caregivers that has not said that.
Right.
I wasn't prepared. And the work that caregiving.com is doing and Dr. Joel is doing, Zander is doing, it's helping people be prepared, whether you're gay or straight. It's these stories that help support the need.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, kudos to Zander for taking his personal experience and like you and like Joel, sort of taking that to the next level and saying, I want to help other people. And in the chat, I think Jennifer, I think who works with Zander, shared the links to the website. So if you just open the chat, you can see the links to the website and then also their Facebook page. So check those out if you have a second. As Zander mentioned, caregiving.net or caregiving.com. He couldn't remember the website. I love how Zach, our video guy, put our link in the bottom just to clarify. Caregiving.com. I had a little chuckle to myself, but we're working with folks like Zander and his team. We want to work with folks like Joel, just again, to bring all this stuff out, create a space for it. One of the questions I was going to ask Joel that answered multiple times in different ways, and I think even you, Chris, asked him one way was, that the higher levels of strain related to LGBTQ caregivers, and one of the reasons or sort of hypotheses around why is sort of the reluctance to reach out for support. Those are the types of things that I think we as a sort of a public entity can help mitigate by just creating that space where you don't necessarily have to feel uncomfortable about going in and announcing yourself and that sort of thing. The other thing, the just question, I'll sort of leave it up to you guys to discuss or not, is just interesting to hear Zander sort of express thoughts and even concerns about his future as a care recipient being LGBTQ. So again, it's not necessarily caregiver related, but it's coming from the perspective of him now as a caregiver and how he's going to then receive care. I find that to be a really, really interesting and almost profound perspective and way to look at it. So yeah, just
yeah, and
any
that actually
thoughts on
kind of
that?
segue into a question I wanted to ask to Joel as well in his research, and because it came out in Zander's conversation about legal representation. It's a pretty known fact that no matter what side of the fence you're on, that people are not legally prepared. They don't have these questions answered. They don't have these discussions with their care partner, their wife, their spouse. And I think it's even more prevalent in the LGBT community. I wonder if your research touched on any of those aspects.
Yeah, so that's a good question. And we did sort of. So again, like I said, we had a lot of questions that we wanted to ask and many more that we didn't because of burden. We did ask folks whether or not the person they were caring for had an advance directive. The majority of them did, if I'm remembering correctly. But we also used a scale that a colleague of mine developed to measure, because we use these instruments and scales to measure things that you can't measure with a thermometer. You can't I can't stick a thermometer in you and it's like, oh, you've got stress. You have to tell me that. And so we used a scale for assessing whether or not someone feels like they can make decisions on someone else's behalf, surrogate decision making, and whether or not they feel like they have enough self-efficacy for doing that, or the knowledge that they need, the wherewithal, however you want to describe that. The folks in our sample scored okay on that scale. But what was interesting is that because a lot of the scales that we used and questionnaires that we used were being used in LGBTQ caregivers for the first time, we got really sort of researchy and scientific and wanted to make sure that they worked well. Because I can create an instrument, for example, if I create an instrument here and use American English and then go and take it to a place like Canada or the UK or New Zealand, it may not translate as well because the ways in which we describe pain, stress, fatigue may be slightly different, despite the fact that we're speaking English. We're all speaking English. So we wanted to make sure that these scales worked well for LGBTQ caregivers because they'd been designed in predominantly white heterosexual caregivers. That surrogate decision-making scale was the only one that didn't perform as well. And that's one of the things that we want to explore because it is such an issue. And it actually came out in some of the comments. We had a sort of open-ended question at the end of, what could we have done better, or what was confusing, or what did you expect? And the few people who responded in the comments sort of touched on that of, well, I wasn't sure when you said family, if you meant my biological family or the people I consider family. It was hard to make decisions for my parent or whomever, and I wasn't sure about those questions. And so that's one of the things we want to take back is, hey, here's the scale that we used, and here are these questions, and there are only 5 questions, but they didn't stick as well with LGBTQ caregivers as they do with other caregivers. Help us understand that so that we can, again, help in that regard. Because as you say, Chris, and as Zander so eloquently put, you don't know until you're in it. And then what do you have to do? And I would say, sort of as you were both commenting on his story, one of the things I thought of was a quote from Rosalind Carter, which lots of people in caregiving have probably heard. I'm just going to paraphrase. There are only 4 types of people in the world: those who are a caregiver, those who have been, those who will be, and those who need one. So even if you're thinking about your own caregiving in the future, or someone providing care for you, that's still, I think, a caregiving story, because it's part of that dynamic of everybody's going to be in this seat or be talking to someone who's in this seat at some point in their life. And it is the stories. The data make us credible, but the stories make us memorable.
It's the stories. And one of the kind of self-serving here, but one of the reasons our caregiving story was so successful was because it talked about the human element. It just happened to be about 2 guys. People were able to put themselves into our story and the struggles that we had because they related to it. It didn't make any difference that just happened to be about 2 guys. And that's why I think these conversations are so important for, especially for somebody like yourself, Joel, who are digging into the stats that can help policymakers make changes so that we can all get the needed resources and help that we need when we're in the middle of something that we're not prepared for.
Absolutely.
Well, and I think too, when you think about consumer design, right? So putting my technology hat on, when you think about consumer design, you've really got to consider how the person on the other end is receiving what you're building. And a lot of that comes down to, does the person feel like you're speaking to them or to someone else? If they feel like you're speaking to them and their situation, they're going to be 10x more likely to engage and to consume the data or the information or the tool that you're putting out. And so one of the things, again, I take away from the whole idea that, they're not this high level of strain and not feeling like the resources and tools were sort of designed for them. A lot of that can just be in the way we're communicating what these tools are.
Exactly.
Words matter, right? And I think it's important, even in, like I said at the beginning after Zander's video, a lot of relevancy there to just about any caregiver. But at the same time, you've got to put his slight to it. You've got to put his sort of twist on it in order to make him feel really connected to whatever it is you're doing. So we, as a technology company, we have to really consider that stuff. And it's something we do prioritize as we look at sort of the broad spectrum of family caregivers. It's a challenge. I will say that it's going to take us a long time to really feel complete. But I think ultimately, when we think about the future we're trying to build, it's critical that we have all of the voices considered and all of the people considered when we're building solutions.
Absolutely. And also learning from what we do and how we can do it better. So in our study, we wanted to be sure that the images that we used and the images that I showed you sort of hit every letter in the acronym. So we were very conscious about sexual orientation and gender identity, not as conscious about race and ethnicity in our study materials. And while we did get a sample that was demographically reflective of census and statistics and what a lot of people in research sort of aim at, when you think about the racial disparities in dementia and caregiving, and that Latino Americans and African Americans are at higher risk and are experiencing this more than their white peers, then that's a completely sort of demographic breakdown. And while we did get close to that with the Latino Americans, we didn't with the African Americans. And one of the things that I thought about was, right as our study was wrapping up, there was a viral photo that went viral of two African-American men kissing, I think, somewhere in Atlanta, that went viral on Facebook or social media because they were showing African-American gay men, in happy. And it's like, yeah, this is a lesson learned for us, that in future, with every study that we do, we've got to think about all of these different identities and making sure that people know this research study is for you, not just this technology is for you and this service is for you, but this research is for you. And so we have, we're working on that. Hopefully we'll be getting some grant funding soon to make that happen.
That's great.
Awesome
That's great
stuff.
I'll point out, I don't think there was a question in her comment, but Marcia, posted about some of the work she's doing in the Gainesville area. So kudos to you, Marcia. So keep that up. She shared sort of a Facebook comment, so feel free to check that out, or a Facebook link. So check out what she's doing down there. So this has been fantastic. I've been captivated the whole time. Folks have questions, feel free to shoot them in. We've got 5 minutes left scheduled, but I'm sure we could take a couple questions and spend a couple minutes. But Chris, do you have anything you want to add or leave us with before I get into sort of next logistics of the next chat and that kind of stuff?
Well, I think it's kind of my pat comment is, as you feel comfortable, share your story, because not only is your story sharing important for those who are hearing it, it's cathartic for the caregiver who's giving it, because you find three very important things: validation, resources, and respite. And you find out that you're not alone in this wonderful journey that you're on with your care partner.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing and that leads me to sort of just a happy plug I want to make for our team, and Christina Best, who's the editor-in-chief of caregiving.com. They put together this really cool thing mainly for Pride Month, but it's something we're going to be continuing to do and to host on the site forever, which is a special place for LGBTQ plus caregivers to share their story. And we want to highlight those stories just like Zander's as much as we can. And again, as people feel comfortable sharing that stuff publicly. I feel silly not having the link available, but we can share it in the YouTube comments. But if you go to caregiving.com, you'll see the featured post where it says share your story. And we've created a form that you can fill that out. Again, it's just there to help us raise awareness and to highlight the amazing work caregivers are doing in every walk of life. So feel free to share.
We'll be having some snippets of our story that was on caregiving.com that'll go out on social media as well. So there's a lot of work to be done.
Marcia said, thank you for doing this. I'm glad you're recording it. I have to go help a 72-year-old gentleman with Parkinson's dementia now. So look at her go. It's real. The folks are here and everybody who did show up, we had quite a few folks come and go. We know how hard it is. The reason we record these and then cut them up for viewing later is we know that scheduling time as a caregiver is nearly impossible. So the folks that do show up, we really do appreciate that and being willing to engage and share comments. So thank you guys who did show up, but also thank you to everyone who wasn't able to. I'll go ahead and make the announcement now, Chris. We're happy to announce live for the first time that Christopher MacLellan, the bow tie guy himself, is going to be our new permanent host of Care Chat on a monthly basis. So if I had a round of applause button, oh look there, Joel hit the clapping emoji. There you go. Link hit it too. He hit the celebration emoji. So Chris, thank you so much. Obviously, you're a friend of the program. You've been a friend of caregiving.com for longer than I've been involved with it. We really appreciate everything you do, and I think you're going to be an amazing host of this thing going forward. We're going to continue to do these. I want to give a shout out as well to Amy, who Joel and Chris know, who's helped organize these. It was Amy's idea to move Care Chat from Twitter and into Zoom. So kudos to Amy on our team. She's moved into a developer role, so she's not going to be doing a lot of the marketing and sort of the content stuff anymore. But I just wanted to take a second and shout out Amy on our team for putting this together. It was her insight, her idea to do this. And I think, honestly, the live aspect of this, I think having the conversation be something that we can deliver asynchronously to people is going to be a lot more value additive to folks who can't attend live. So I think kudos to her and kudos to Chris on taking over the helm of Care Chats. I'm sure it's going to be a fun thing for us to do every month. Yeah,
very much so.
So the next one, right? The next one is going to be Tuesday, July 27th. I don't know that we have a topic or theme. We probably do, but as you know, Chris, I'm often out of the loop on these things, and smarter, better people are usually in charge of organizing.
But there's technology that will be able to get the word out to everybody. And I certainly want to stay connected with everybody that has participated today. And I can't wait to talk to Joel some more. That's be great.
Absolutely. Thank you, Joel.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you on the next Care Chat, and thanks for tuning in.